I never thought my own family could turn on me like this. But the day I realized Ethan had quietly taken control of my business, it felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I spent decades building my company, putting in late nights, sacrifices, everything. And suddenly, someone I trusted with my daughter's hand had been plotting behind my back. Before I go any further, let me say this. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone who was supposed to protect your family's legacy, this story will hit hard. There's a lesson here about patience, awareness, and how even the smallest overlooked detail can become a weapon of justice. Stay with me. By the end, you'll see exactly how one old insurance clause changed everything, and how betrayal can sometimes lead to the most satisfying form of justice. Ethan had always seemed like the perfect son-in-law. Polite, charming, ambitious, but not too ambitious. At least, that's what I thought. When he married my daughter, I welcomed him into our family and even into my business, thinking a family partnership would strengthen both our ties and the company. I never imagined the trust I offered could be used against me. For months, small things felt off. Reports I used to review myself suddenly disappeared from my desk. Emails that should have been transparent were forwarded without my knowledge, and every time I asked a question, Ethan had an answer, a calm smile, a subtle way of convincing me everything was under control. I blamed myself, thinking maybe I was overreacting or losing track with age. The turning point came when I discovered that some of our biggest contracts had been reassigned, without my knowledge. The numbers didn't add up. Revenue streams I'd relied on for years were suddenly inaccessible. It hit me slowly, like a weight pressing down. Ethan wasn't just making decisions. He was quietly taking over. My company, piece by piece, under my nose. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to yell, to demand answers. But I remembered the words my father always said. You never expose the whole hand too soon. Watch first, listen, then act. So I stayed calm. I watched. I waited. And I started looking for the one thing that might undo him. Then I found it. An old insurance policy tucked in the company files, dated years before Ethan even entered the picture. At first glance, it looked routine, but the more I studied it, the more I realized its power. My company had a clause protecting against unilateral control changes and requiring full owner consent for major decisions. A clause Ethan hadn't accounted for, a clause he had overlooked, and that clause would put him on his knees. I didn't act immediately. I needed to see how deep Ethan's takeover went before making a move. So I started combing through every file, every contract, every account in the business. The further I dug, the clearer it became. He had quietly transferred responsibilities, shifted authority, and even signed agreements in my name without my consent. Each discovery was worse than the last. Emails that should have required my approval were sent under a fabricated digital signature. Vendors were being redirected to him. Even my daughter, sweet and trusting, had no idea what was happening. It wasn't just control he had taken, it was invisibility. He'd erased me from the daily operations while appearing completely above board. That night, I sat in my office, staring at the insurance policy. The clause was precise, legal, and unbreakable. It required that any ownership or control change of more than 25% of company shares be approved by me, the original owner. Without my explicit consent, no one could legally assume control. Ethan hadn't seen it. He hadn't even checked the old policy when he began redirecting authority. It was my weapon, hidden in plain sight. All I had to do was present it in the right way. But I needed proof, clear, undeniable proof that he had violated the terms of the agreement. The next morning, I called our accountant under the guise of reviewing routine finances. I asked for records of all transactions, contracts, and changes in authority over the past 6 months. As the documents arrived, I saw it. Signatures forged, approvals bypassed, contracts altered, all directly violating the insurance clause. It was worse than I imagined. Ethan thought he was smart, careful, but in his arrogance he had ignored one small detail: the legal protection my father had set up in that policy years ago. I felt a strange mix of relief and determination. Relief that the law was on my side, and determination to make sure Ethan faced the consequences of his greed. By mid-afternoon, I had everything compiled: the insurance policy, the proof of violations, and a detailed timeline of his moves. I wasn't going to ambush him blindly. No shouting, no confrontation. I would let the law and the clause do the work, while I watched him realize the house of cards he had built was about to collapse. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Ethan was already there, seated behind my old desk, pretending to organize files. The audacity of him using my chair, in my office. While I had been watching him quietly dismantle everything I'd built, it made my chest tighten, but I stayed calm. Every move had to be precise, every word measured. I closed the door behind me and he looked up, startled. That was the first crack in his confidence. "David, good morning," he said, voice smooth, trying to sound casual. "Morning, Ethan," I said evenly. "I've been reviewing some old policies and financial records. Thought we could go over a few things." He shifted in his seat, trying to hide the tension that had already begun crawling up his spine. "Sure, of course. Anything important?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, I think it's very important." I placed the thick folder containing all the documents, the insurance policy, the contracts, the proof of his unauthorized actions, on the desk. I slid it toward him slowly, deliberately. He glanced at the top sheet, and I saw the change immediately. His eyes widened, his hands froze mid-motion. He tried to grab the folder, but I let it sit there, untouched. "Take a look," I said. Ethan's voice was shaky. What is this?" "That, Ethan," I said, pointing to the insurance policy, "is the clause you never read, the clause you ignored, the one that legally prevents anyone from assuming control of my company without my consent." His face paled. That's old. That doesn't—" "Old?" I interrupted, calm but firm. "Old doesn't mean invalid. Old means binding, and you violated it, multiple times." I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. He knew it. He had thought he was untouchable, and now the truth was sitting between us, undeniable. I began to outline the timeline, each of his moves meticulously documented, the contracts he reassigned, the approvals he bypassed, the emails sent under forged signatures. Every single violation corresponded directly to the insurance clause, proving that he had overstepped legal boundaries. His hands shook as he tried to speak. "David, I didn't think—" "You didn't think?" I echoed. "You didn't think that a clause drafted decades ago would protect the company from greed? You didn't think I'd pay attention?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door as if considering escape. But he knew there was nowhere to go. The law was on my side. The documents were irrefutable. And worst of all for him, my patience had held out until now, letting the evidence stack until he couldn't wiggle free. "I had to. I wanted to help," he said, voice cracking. "I was trying to grow the company, make it better." "You didn't need to take it from me," I said softly, almost pitying him now. "You didn't need to hide anything. You just needed transparency and trust. Something you clearly didn't think was necessary." His shoulders slumped. The confident, charming man who had walked into my life months ago was gone, replaced by someone cornered, small and utterly exposed. I leaned back slightly, letting the folder rest on the desk between us. "Here's the deal," I said. "The insurance clause protects the company and me as the owner. Any unilateral actions you took are null and void. All contracts reassigned without my consent are reversed. And the authority you assumed, gone." He didn't argue. He couldn't. His pride, his arrogance, his attempts at manipulation, they had all been neutralized by one piece of paper, one clause. I understand," he whispered, finally lowering his gaze. I'll cooperate."
"Good," I said. "Cooperate, and maybe we can rebuild some trust. Try to remember that business isn't just about numbers and power. It's about people, relationships, and respect. You forgot that."
He nodded mutely, knowing the lesson was harsh but unavoidable. For months he had thought he was untouchable, that he could quietly seize control of my life's work. But he overlooked a single clause, a single piece of protection my family had put in place decades ago. That oversight destroyed every plan he had carefully executed behind my back. I felt the weight lift slightly. The company was secure. The contracts were corrected. The authority that should have remained mine was restored. Justice wasn't violent or explosive. It was methodical, quiet, and undeniable. Later, I went to my office window, looking out at the city I'd built my life in. For a long time, I had carried the bitterness of betrayal, wondering if trust was worth anything anymore. Now, I realized that vigilance, patience, and a clear understanding of the rules could protect you even from the closest betrayals. I turned to the folder one last time. The insurance clause hadn't just protected a company. It had reminded me that preparation and foresight are as powerful as instinct and anger. Ethan had learned that lesson the hardest way, and I had learned that sometimes the quiet strategy is stronger than immediate confrontation. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, remember this. One small detail, one overlooked rule, one hidden protection can turn the tide. Don't underestimate the power of patience, the law, or the principle of fairness. And sometimes revenge isn't about anger. It's about letting the truth fully revealed do the work for you. The best part? Ethan learned that no matter how confident you are, shortcuts and deception have consequences. And the one old insurance clause, overlooked for years, put him exactly where he belonged, on his knees. After the confrontation in the office, I knew I had Ethan exactly where I wanted him. But I wasn't done yet. Seeing him cornered was satisfying, yes, but the business wasn't just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming everything he had tried to steal and making sure this kind of betrayal could never happen again. I spent the next day going through every department, every financial report, every contract Ethan had touched. I wanted a complete audit, not to punish, but to ensure the company's foundation was secure. And what I discovered was shocking. He had overstepped far more than I realized. Vendor payments redirected, funds temporarily withheld, client communications manipulated. He hadn't just assumed control. He'd attempted to profit quietly from decisions he wasn't authorized to make. I called in our accountant and legal team for an emergency meeting. The moment Ethan walked in, I could see the fear in his eyes. He had convinced himself he could navigate around the clause, that the insurance policy was just a technicality, something to overlook. But now, every step he had taken was documented and laid bare. The lawyer opened the session with calm authority. Ethan, we've reviewed the transactions and contracts from the last 6 months. Many of these changes were executed without David's consent, in direct violation of the insurance clause. As a result, all unilateral decisions are null and void. You will need to reverse these actions immediately. Ethan tried to respond. I didn't think. Didn't think? I cut in, voice steady, controlled. You didn't think I would pay attention. You didn't think that decades-old protections would still hold weight. You didn't think honesty and procedure mattered. He looked down at his hands. For the first time, there was no charm, no manipulation, just fear. The arrogance that had fueled him for months was gone, replaced with the realization that his scheme had collapsed entirely. I handed him a copy of the clause and the detailed audit. Every action you took that violated this clause has consequences. You will comply fully with the corrections outlined here. Any attempt to circumvent this process will result in legal action. He swallowed hard. I understand. And that was all he could manage. The rest was silence. Watching him sit there, I realized something important. Justice doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, and unavoidable. Ethan had assumed he could operate in the shadows, manipulate the company, and erase me. But one small piece of foresight, a clause tucked away in a dusty policy, had destroyed his plan. Later, I addressed the board and management team. I explained the situation calmly, outlining the steps to restore all operations, client relationships, and financial flows. No shame, no personal attacks, just facts, evidence, and direction. The team appreciated the transparency, the clarity, and the decisiveness. They trusted me, and that trust was now more solid than ever. By evening, Ethan had begun reversing his unauthorized actions. Payments were corrected, communications restored, contracts reissued under proper authorization. Watching him work was surreal. The man who had once walked with such arrogance now followed instructions like a student learning a lesson he could never forget. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction came from the realization that justice had been served without theatrics. The company was intact. clause had done its job, and Ethan had learned a lesson far more valuable than any reprimand I could give. Deceit only works until the law, the rules, and preparation catch up to you. That night, I sat in my office, looking at the city skyline. The lights shimmered like promises kept, like years of hard work finally secure. I thought about my daughter, about how she had trusted both of us, unaware of the hidden tension under the surface. I thought about the insurance clause, a relic from decades past, and how it had protected everything I had built. Sometimes I realized it's not enough to build a business. You have to protect it, strategically, methodically, legally. You have to anticipate not just the market but human greed and the people closest to you who might forget loyalty in pursuit of opportunity. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle. Ethan's pride, his plans, his manipulations, they were all neutralized. The business was mine, legally, morally, and operationally. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But there was one lesson I wanted to share with anyone listening. Vigilance matters, patience matters, and one overlooked old legal protection can change everything. You don't always need to fight with anger. Sometimes the law, foresight, and careful documentation do the work for you, and the result is far more satisfying than revenge alone. Tomorrow I would meet with Ethan again, not to punish, but to ensure compliance and teach a final lesson about trust, responsibility, and respect. And after that, I could finally move forward, confident that my company, my legacy, and my family would remain protected. This was the calm after the storm, the moment when justice, patience, and one old insurance clause had brought everything back into balance. Ethan had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated the importance of foresight. But now he had no choice but to acknowledge it, and in that acknowledgement the full weight of his mistakes became painfully clear. The next morning I walked into the office with a quiet certainty. Ethan had spent the night reversing unauthorized actions, sending emails to vendors, correcting accounts, but I knew the real reckoning was still ahead. The insurance clause wasn't just a tool for legality, it was leverage, a reminder that every action had consequences, and now it was time he fully understood just how high the stakes were. I called him into my office. He arrived quickly, nervous, shuffling papers like a guilty schoolboy. He avoided eye contact, but I didn't flinch. I let him stew for a moment, letting the tension build, knowing that patience was more powerful than anger. "Ethan," I said, voice calm but firm, "we need to talk about what happened." He nodded mutely. "Yes, I know. I've started correcting everything." I leaned back and studied him carefully. "Do you understand the full extent of your actions? Not just the transfers, the emails, or the contracts, but the breach of trust, the manipulation of the company, and your attempt to take control without consent." He swallowed hard. I understand now." I slid the folder with the insurance clause and full audit toward him. He looked at it, hands trembling. I could see the reality sinking in. The evidence was undeniable. Every unauthorized move, every forged signature, every hidden transaction, all laid bare. He had gambled, thinking no one would notice, and the law, combined with my vigilance, had caught him. "You see this?" I asked. "This clause isn't just words on paper, it's protection. It's what ensures the company survives greed, ambition, and betrayal. And you tested it." His eyes flicked down at the documents again, avoiding mine. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, letting a hint of disbelief creep into my tone. "You weren't sloppy. You weren't naive. You planned, executed, and hid. You gambled with my life's work and the trust of this family. That wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. And now, thanks to one old insurance clause, your plan is completely destroyed." He finally looked up at me. For the first time, the arrogance, the charm, the false confidence, everything that had made him dangerous, was gone. He was small, cornered, and fully exposed. I continued. "Everything you tried to control, every contract you redirected, every decision you forced, reversed. The company is secure. You are accountable for every unauthorized action, and you will comply fully, or the legal consequences will be severe." He swallowed again, nodding. "I understand. I'll do whatever is required." I let silence fill the room for a moment. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. Watching him process the full weight of his choices was far more satisfying than shouting, confrontation, or anger. He had been undone by foresight, patience, and the law, not by rage. Then I said softly, "You also need to understand something else. This isn't just about legality. It's about respect. Respect for the company, respect for me, and respect for my daughter. That respect was absent in your actions, and now it will be restored. Completely." He nodded mutely, humbled. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to manipulate. Every step he had taken to gain control had collapsed under the weight of one clause he never anticipated. Later, I held a company-wide meeting. I explained the situation calmly, without embarrassment or personal attacks, outlining the steps to secure operations, restore client trust, and ensure that nothing like this could happen again. The team listened intently, reassured that transparency and justice were guiding the company. Their trust in me deepened, stronger than ever before. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, visibly shaken. I didn't need to humiliate him. He was already aware of the full consequences. The clause, the audit, and the exposure had put him exactly where he belonged, humbled, accountable, and powerless. After the meeting, I returned to my office. I looked out the window at the skyline I had built my life around. The city lights shimmered like years of hard work preserved, protected, and vindicated. I realized something vital. Patience, preparation, and foresight are often more powerful than immediate confrontation. The law, documentation, and vigilance can protect you when trust is broken, and sometimes justice works quietly, but more effectively than anger ever could. I turned back to the folder one last time, then locked it away. Ethan had learned the hardest lesson of his life. Deception has limits, and shortcuts only work until someone pays attention. The company was mine, legally, morally, and operationally. The betrayal had been exposed, reversed, and neutralized. To anyone watching this story, if you've been betrayed or silenced by someone you trusted, remember this. Preparation, attention to detail, and knowing your rights can be more powerful than immediate confrontation. The truth has a way of revealing itself when you stay vigilant. And sometimes one overlooked clause, one careful step, or one quiet act of observation can completely destroy the plans of someone who thinks they are untouchable. Thank you for watching. If you've ever experienced betrayal, share your story in the comments. Your experience matters. And if you want more stories of family, business, and poetic justice, hit that subscribe button. We cover real-life tales where patience meets strategy, and the truth always finds a way. Before you go, there's another story waiting for you. A father discovers that his children secretly sold the family cabin, only to uncover a hidden key that changes everything. Click the next video to see how secrets, silence, and careful observation turn into the ultimate justice.